The Dungeon Keeper franchise is regarded by many as one of the most unique and influential series in the history of strategy and simulation games. Created by Peter Molyneux and developed by Bullfrog Productions, the franchise captured the imaginations of players with its innovative gameplay, distinctive sense of humour, and unique approach to the strategy genre. From its debut in 1997 to its more recent iterations, the Dungeon Keeper franchise remains a beloved classic to me and many other gamers. The franchise began in 1997 with the release of the first game, Dungeon Keeper. The game was a fresh and innovative take on the real-time strategy genre, in which players assumed the role of an evil dungeon overlord, tasked with managing a dark underground layer, recruiting minions, and defending it from would-be heroes. Unlike most strategy games where players control armies of knights or wizards, Dungeon Keeper placed players in the role of a villain, allowing them to build and manage their own dungeon and control a variety of monstrous creatures such as imps, trolls, and demons. One of the game's defining features was its inversion of the typical hero versus villain narrative. In Dungeon Keeper, players were encouraged to think creatively and ruthlessly, constructing traps, expanding their lair, and using minions' abilities to both gather resources and defeat invading heroes. The game's open-ended design, which offered numerous ways to approach its objectives, was a significant departure from traditional RTS titles, which often relied on more rigid strategies. The game's combination of strategic depth, humour, and its twist on the genre helped it gain a loyal following, though it did not achieve massive commercial success. Nevertheless, it is often cited as one of the most innovative titles of its time, inspiring a new wave of simulation and strategy games that focused on the management of virtual environments from a darker perspective. The next iteration is where I spent most of my time. I didn't play the first one, and so Dungeon Keeper 2 was the one that pretty much stole my heart and cemented this in my catalogue of all-time favourite games. A mere 2 years after the success of the original game, Dungeon Keeper 2 was released in 1999. Developed once again by Bullfrog Productions, but this time without Peter Molyneux, who did not have an active role in the creation of this game. Many of his ideas did live on in this sequel, as it retained the core mechanics that made the first game so successful, while improving on them in several key areas. One of the most notable changes was the game's enhanced graphics, which made the environments more immersive and detailed. The use of 3D visuals, which was a leap forward in the late 90s, helped make the dungeons feel more alive and dynamic. Being able to see your dungeon up close and personal gave this game something extra, over and above the first one, and it allowed for the player to almost bond with their minions. Many of the gameplay elements that players loved about the original were refined and polished, such as the management of minions and resources. The game introduced more varied creatures, additional traps, and new ways to interact with the dungeon environment. However, perhaps the most significant change was the addition of an improved multiplayer mode, which allowed players to face off against each other as rival dungeon keepers. I spent most of my time though in the single player modes. The campaign was brilliant fun, progressing you slowly through a journey to vanquish the armies of heroes, looking for gems to hand over to your boss so that a portal to the surface could be created. The Horned Reaper, or Horny as he became affectionately known, is effectively your master. You work for him and do his bidding. But if you part ways with a significant amount of mana, you can summon him for a short time. He is invincible and is only interested in one thing when you summon him to your realm, and that is to kill anything that moves. He will not last for a huge amount of time, but can help turn the tide of battle quickly if you can afford him. But beware, if his path to the enemy is blocked, his bloodthirsty rage will quickly turn to your own minions. Of the single player modes, I spent most of my time in the My Pet Dungeon mode. It allowed for a more sandbox approach to the gameplay loop, which revolved around bringing minions into your realm and, when you felt ready to, squashing those pesky do-good heroes. To attract those minions, each room you built would in turn attract different minions to your cause, who each brought unique skills to add to your army, but also to aid in your dungeon's construction and general operations. For example, a warlock, which was attracted by a library, would spend his days researching new spells for you, but in battle he acted as a support character, hurling fireballs from a distance and healing other creatures from your troop. Some characters had more than one ability. One of my favourite units, the Deadly Dark Angel, who is unlocked very late in the game, will happily pray in the temple room, generating mana for you to use, allowing you to cast powerful spells that can boost production, summon more workers, or turn the tide of battle with the deadly spells available to you. Not only that, they can also lend a hand in the library, researching and upgrading spells along with the warlocks. Each room would take an increasing amount of time to unlock, so there was no real rush to build things, but that didn't stop me from building ahead ahead of schedule. Planning out vast dungeons so that you had rooms ready and waiting for the next unlock was part of the fun to me. Assuming you had enough gold, you could then quickly build it straight away once it was available and hopefully attract a new minion to your dungeon very quickly. The rooms had a certain charm to them. Once dug out by your trusty little imps, they would then reinforce the walls that not only made them harder to penetrate for would-be marauding foes to break through, but it would also decorate them in the style of the room, adding to the aesthetic perfectly, such as skeletons in chains hanging from the walls of the prison. This upgrading of the walls would also have a further benefit by adding in extra stations for your minions to use, such as an extra research station in the library to speed up the next spell unlock, targets to aim at for your creature's skill progression in the training room, or an extra torture rack in the torture chamber. The minions themselves are a diverse group of characters who all have unique traits and quirks to them. The Bile Demon is a slow, morbid beast who is great in the workshop and a tank on the front lines, but have too many of them and they'll eat all your chickens, leaving very few for anyone else. The Mistress is terrifying, sinister and dangerous all in one package. She will use her claws to rip through enemies, particularly when she levels up, but she will also happily spend her time interrogating your enemies in the torture chamber, and when she's not doing that, she also enjoys a good bit of punishment herself, although maybe she enjoys it a little too much. Every one of the minions are so different from one another, and the game is a richer place for every one of them, because they don't just show up at random. Your choices in terms of the rooms that you build and how big you build them affect which ones come through the portal. Some though can only join you through death. After striking down a foe in battle, if their incapacitated bodies lay on your land, your imps will drag them to the prison where they're at your mercy, at which point you have two options available to you. You can let them rot and eventually die so that you get undead skeletons join you, or you can drop them into the torture chamber for your mistresses to have some fun with. Once dead, they will reveal map information to you, but if you prolong their suffering by healing them, you can convince them to join your cause. Even the heroes can be convinced to turn sides. There is also a use for the corpses. If your prison is full, if you've got it closed, or you simply just don't have one, then the body will eventually die where it was struck down. Then a dead body can be dragged to a graveyard, and when enough corpses have rotted into the ground, a vampire will rise from the depths and join you. Oh man, this game is so damn good. You know, there are some games where the lore, the atmosphere and the general vibe mean that you often just get lost in the world that you've created at your fingertips, where you just sit back at times and not do a great deal other than watch your creation come to life. Another noteworthy aspect of Dungeon Keeper was its humour. The game was infused with dark, tongue-in-cheek humorous lines from the narrator, voiced by the legendary British actor Richard Ridings in both this and the first entry. He superbly delivered witty, sardonic commentary throughout the player's progress. The tone was a sharp contrast to the serious nature of this game, further cementing Dungeon Keeper as a cult classic. His deep voice resonates so perfectly with your evil deeds in this game, and it really adds to that overall feeling that you are indeed evil. Richard has one of those voices that you just wish you had yourself, a James Earl Jones level of presence when he speaks. It is no wonder that Dungeon Keeper 2 is not the only game that he has worked on. He's worked on the Total War Warhammer franchise, Grid Autosport, Galacticaire, Ni no Kuni, Devil May Cry, and Assassin's Creed Unity, plus many others. He also did the narration for the spiritual successor to this game, War for the Overworld. However, and whilst this is a slight tangent, Richard also has another string to his bow. I wonder if there are any parents watching this video. If there are, then there is a good chance that, like me, you have been forced to watch or listen to Peppa Pig. Now that I've said this, how many of you are already making that realization, if you didn't already know? I recall vividly hearing this character in the show for the first time and wondering, where on earth have I heard this voice from? I know I've heard it from somewhere, and then all of a sudden it dawned on me, but surely it couldn't be the same guy. A quick Google search confirmed it. Richard Ridings is the voice of Daddy Pig. I digress. This game holds a very special place for me. I lost many an afternoon and evening just designing these dungeons, to the point I remember doodling dungeon layout designs on paper whilst in exams at school. Finishing an exam early meant sitting in a hall in total silence, so what better way to spend that time than to get creative with layouts of dungeons for my minions on the nearest bit of paper. Although Dungeon Keeper 2 improved upon many aspects of the original, it was surprisingly met with mixed receptions from fans. Some appreciated the game's refined mechanics and visuals, whilst others felt that it lacked the same sense of freedom and charm that made the first game so special. Having not played the first really, I can't comment on this. However, I never felt like I was particularly restricted or that I couldn't build what I wanted, how I wanted it. Despite these mixed reactions, Dungeon Keeper 2 was generally well received and helped solidify the franchise's place in gaming history. After the success and popularity of the first two entries, it seemed that a third game was a formality. There was even a brief trailer that suggested that a portal to the surface had finally been created and that battle would commence in the light. But sadly, it was not to be, as that was was the only media we ever saw about a third installment. The reasons behind the cancellation of Dungeon Keeper 3 has long been a topic of speculation among fans. Research and anecdotes suggest that whilst there were several factors that contributed to the series' eventual abandonment, it would appear that the most significant reason was a shift in the priorities of the publisher, who by this point was EA. But of course it was. Then, out of the blue, after a long hiatus from the franchise, Dungeon Keeper returned in 2014. The initial excitement I had when I heard this soon fell through the floor when I saw that not only was it a mobile game, but at what they had done to the main character Horny. I mean, look at this. What the fucking hell is that? Developed by Mythic Entertainment and published by Electronic Arts, Dungeon Keeper Mobile was a free-to-play mobile game that received significant criticism from players and critics alike. The mobile version of Dungeon Keeper moved away from the strategic, immersive dungeon building experience of the original games and instead focused on microtransactions and a freemium model that encouraged players to spend real money to speed up the gameplay. I kid you not, to dig out 1 square of rock in your base, 24 hours of waiting. At least though the pushback was hard. The decision to shift the series to mobile and adopt such a controversial monetization model alienated many long-time fans of the franchise. The backlash was significant, criticised for its reliance on in-app purchases, lack of depth, simplified mechanics, and the disrespected complete dissection of the fearsome Horned Reaper made this release an absolute and complete car crash. It was a far cry from the clever, engaging design of its predecessors, and ultimately became a cautionary tale for the industry about the potential pitfalls of monetizing classic franchise in a way that alienates their core audience, which they absolutely all learned from, didn't they? Yeah, right. This blatant attempt to cash grab using an established IP was yet another sign of where EA's company was heading, and it destroyed all that was left of any hope that we would see a fully fledged entry into this legendary franchise, all the while EA was at the wheel of it. Despite the disappointing reception of Dungeon Keeper Mobile, the legacy of the original games endures. The series had a lasting influence on a variety of games that followed, particularly within the simulation and strategy genres. Many game developers have cited Dungeon Keeper as a source of inspiration, from other dungeon management games like War for the Overworld to titles that explore the management of virtual spaces such as Prison Architect and 2 Point Hospital. The cancellation of this series remains to this day one of my biggest gaming disappointments of all time. I adored Dungeon Keeper 2, and even though this game is now 26 years old, I think it would cause one hell of a stir if it were to ever return. Although I think I speak for everyone when I say that I wouldn't want EA to do it. Dungeon Keeper Ultimate Team? Yeah, no thanks. For those who still yearn for that Dungeon Keeper experience, I can wholeheartedly recommend the War for the Overworld game that I mentioned earlier. It is a fantastic game with very similar game mechanics, a nice fresh coat of paint, and it was in fact made by ex-devs from the Dungeon Keeper 2 game. Plus, as mentioned, it is narrated by Richard Ridings, which helps it feel like home.
Welcome back, Underlord.
The concept of managing and customizing environments with a focus on creativity and player-driven design remains a popular idea in modern game development. While Dungeon Keeper itself may not have continued as a major franchise, its innovative approach to game mechanics, storytelling and humour has left a significant mark on the gaming industry. The best bit about this game is that it still works, and in my opinion, whilst the graphics do look very dated, it still stands up pretty well in 2025, and it's still a ton of fun. The Dungeon Keeper franchise is a beloved example of how creativity and innovation can shape the trajectory of a game genre. From its humble beginnings in 1997 to the refined entry in 99 and then the mobile self-destruction in 2014, the series has influenced generations of players and developers. While the franchise may not have seen consistent success, its impact on the strategy and simulation genres is undeniable. Dungeon Keeper will always be remembered for its humour, its inversion of the traditional hero-villain tropes, and its unique approach to dungeon management. For many, it remains one of the most memorable and influential games of the late 90s, with a lasting legacy that continues to inspire new generations of game designers. Here is hoping that one day we will be able to be horny again. Thanks everyone for watching this. Really enjoy making these sort of retrospective looks at old games, which not only makes me happy when remembering them, but also allows me to often replay these games to gather the footage, helping me realise once more just how good these games were. Let me know in the comments down below whether you played this, did you love it as much as I did, and also what other games would you love me to play on this channel. Make sure you hit the like, smash the subscribe and ring that notification bell to be notified of all my uploads. It's been awesome exploring Dungeon Keeper with you all, and I'll see you all on the next video.